Being an investigator can mean a lot of things. When it comes to investigating homicides, it's basically two things: finding witnesses and taking statements, both of which I'm very good at. In my capacity teaching Missouri concealed carry training so people could get their permits to carry pistols concealed, I've met and debriefed about 24 Navy veterans, men that don't know each other. This is critical. When you interview witnesses who don't know each other, that are basically telling you almost the exact same story, that's very important. It should get your attention. It got my attention. Without exception, these men were all told the following: gentlemen, in your lifetimes, not your children's, not your grandchildren's, gentlemen, in your lifetimes, these oceans are going to come out of their basins, flooding all coastal areas worldwide. Now, they weren't told why. They're sitting in the folding chairs, getting this briefing. They weren't told why it would happen. They were just told that it would happen. There's a group in the United States called the Prophecy Club. They did something with me they'd never done with any other speaker. They sent me on 2 speaking tours in less than a year. The first one had to do with terrorism. The second one had to do with Nibiru, Wormwood, Planet X. So I'm in Detroit, and we got standing room only in this room. And I'm talking about Nibiru, and I'm talking about the Navy veterans living in the Arkansas, Missouri Ozarks. 3-hour presentation, 2 10-minute breaks. At the end of the first break, a gentleman walks up and introduces himself. He says, "John, I'm in the insurance industry. Myself, my co-workers, we've wondered for years, why is there such a cluster of thousands of Navy veterans in the zip codes, the counties of the Arkansas, Missouri Ozarks?" He said, "Now we know. Now we know." That's why I've bumped into so many of these men in these pistol classes, because when they retired, they wanted their families to be safe and move to one of the known safe areas. We'll be talking more about that later this afternoon. What are safe areas? Why are they safe? And what you can do to be safe yourself. And it doesn't apply just to the United States, it applies worldwide. When I was talking to Alexandra about coming here over the past 2 months, she initially asked me what my thoughts were when I first found out about this, and when I determined that, first of all, it was real, and second of all, that the United States government was not going to inform anybody. I told Alexandra I was very angry that our government would do nothing to inform our people, to help them be safe. I was very angry. That was 17 years ago. I've now come to an entirely different conclusion, however. If they had informed people in 1979 or 1980, it wouldn't change much. To create housing, fresh water, have places for people to stay and work in the middle of the country, that couldn't happen in 1979. It can't happen now. It's too much. That infrastructure does not exist and won't exist. Informing people what would happen would only lead to early death and early misery for people who are going to die anyway. That's the conclusion I've come to. That's my reality. In the meantime, I inform as many people as I can personally because it's the right thing to do, knowing full well that it's a small audience, maybe 1 out of 100, maybe 1 out of 200 will understand this information, incorporate it into their being, and actually do something about it. A very tiny percentage. But I reach out to the ones I can, and they do what they're going to do. I take no responsibility for what they do. That's their choice. There's been lots of rabbit trails along the way this past 17 years, finding out about things I never really looked into before, about space, about planets, about the effects of these planets, ancient archaeology. This old planet that we live on has been through these cycles many times in the past. There's an area of archaeology that's kind of loosely called forbidden archaeology. I've got a nice stack of books about that particular area. And the evidence is not that difficult to find. We recently, I say we, Western civilization, the scientists, the archaeologists, only 6 or 7 years ago found the second tallest man-made building on the planet. It was, up until the hotel in Dubai was built, the tallest building on the planet. The pyramid in Bosnia, the Great Pyramid in Bosnia, I think they call it the Pyramid of the Sun, which as of July 2017 is the second tallest human-built building on the planet. This is only, I believe in 2017, only year number 6, maybe year number 7, that archaeologists have been working there to determine what this thing is, who built it, when it was built, and they still don't know who built it or when it was built. The second tallest building on the planet. If you go to the Saudi Arabian Peninsula, to just the right spot, you'll find hundreds of acres covered with green glass. Well, before August of 1945, we didn't know how you get the heat of the sun at the surface of the planet. We didn't know that. We found out twice in August 1945 in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. That's how the sand in the Saudi Arabian Peninsula turned into glass. We now know that nuclear weapons were not only set off in ancient times in Saudi Arabia, but, for example, Kashmir, that disputed territory between India and Pakistan. I was talking to a friend of mine, a retired petroleum engineer. I know he'd been all over the planet. And I asked him, have you ever been to Kashmir? He says, yes, John. My wife and I went there on vacation. I said, are you aware nuclear devices were set off there 12,000 years ago? He says, oh yeah, John. They sell trinkets in the local souvenir shops commemorating nuclear devices being set off 12,000 years ago in Kashmir. It's common knowledge. And the scientists can go there right now in July of 2017 with the right detection equipment, and they can find the radioactive isotopes in Kashmir. There's other places. Europe has had nuclear devices set off here 12,000 years ago, and other places. Our ancestors, and this whole thing about aliens, I think, is partly a cover-up. Our ancestors had the ability to split the atom 12,000 years ago. That's my reality, and the evidence is right there. If you go through the history books, you'll find a cycle of about every 3,600 years. You go back 3,600 years ago, 7,200 years ago, and so forth. Major civilizations collapsing and new civilizations coming up about every 3,600 years. That's what the evidence shows. Something cataclysmic happens to this planet about every 3,600 years. And we, all of you listening and watching, we're the generation that's going to experience the next one. I'm absolutely convinced of it. The United States government is convinced of it. The Russian government's convinced of it. The Chinese government. You think they built those beautiful new cities in China for work programs? I don't believe so, no. They built them because they need them. They built them because they have no choice. You think the Russian government hollowed out entire mountains to house millions of people as a work program? I don't believe so. They did it because they had no choice. The U.S. government is not taking care of their people. They're not building shelters for the American population. They have built very extensive, very nice shelters for their own people, the military, government officials, but not for the American population. Now, I've heard, and I haven't verified, that Norway has notified their people to a certain extent. I interviewed a man from Switzerland, and he says, John, it's not quite real common, but somewhat common knowledge in Switzerland about the violently rising ocean levels. So there's a whole subcurrent of people worldwide that know about this, governments that know about this, and are making plans and spending hundreds of millions, billions of dollars to prepare for this event. One of the things I came across in my research was a tribe in Africa called the Dagon people. They have a cave that's got images on the roof of the cave showing our solar system, complete with Pluto that they've had for many, many centuries. We didn't know Pluto existed till about 100 years ago, by the way, 110 years ago. We didn't know Pluto even existed, but it's been on this cave in Africa for many, many centuries. It's part of their religious beliefs to maintain that cave. And they appoint one person for their lifetime to be the guardian of that cave and that knowledge. If there's anything I can get across to the people watching this DVD, this film, is that you need to pay heed. You need to do your own independent research. You need to come to your own conclusions. You can believe that China built massive, brand new, shiny cities for tens of millions of people as a work project, or you can believe they built them because they have no choice. I tend to believe the latter. You can believe that the CIA moved thousands of employees, their families, their furniture, their dogs, 1,700 miles for no good reason, or you can believe they did it because they had no choice. The Denver airport is a fascinating place. I haven't been inside. I've driven past it half a dozen times. I don't really want to go in there. They moved enough dirt there to build a brand new Panama Canal. That's a lot of dirt. Millions of cubic yards, cubic meters of dirt. There's basically an underground city there. There was a film done many years ago called Close Encounters of the Third Kind. Incredibly popular film. They give the coordinates of where the aliens and the human beings are going to meet. The latitude and longitude of where the aliens and the human beings are going to meet. And it really is a real latitude and real longitude. And when I first found out about this, I was incorrect in where that latitude and longitude was. But now that I've looked into it a little deeper, I know the reality of it. When the film was produced, well, first of all, in the film they say that latitude and longitude is Devil's Tower, which is a very popular tourist attraction, I believe in Montana, if I'm not mistaken. It turns out that latitude and longitude is not Devil's Tower. And at the time the movie was being made, there was about 6, maybe 7 possible locations for the new Denver airport. The latitude and longitude is north of Denver and a little bit east, but nowhere near where that Devil's Tower is. I haven't verified it, but I believe that the latitude and longitude that they gave in the film was probably one of the 6 possible locations for the new Denver airport. It certainly was not Devil's Tower. We know that for a fact. Hiding things in plain sight. You may hear that term occasionally, but they do that. They hide things in plain sight. They use cover stories, they use obfuscation, and outright lies, of course. I know in Missouri, I've ran across a couple of these government projects. One was the Weldon Springs Remedial Action Project, very near St. Louis, the next county west. I was training out there. I was in the Army Reserves from 1979 until I think about 1983 or so. I was training out there with Special Forces in 1979 and 80 when the government announced a Superfund cleanup site to clean up nuclear waste. It was about a 2,000-acre area. And in the 1950s, they took about 40 acres, and they were manufacturing nuclear material for the Defense Department. So they announced that they were going to clean that up, and we all thought, that's fine, clean it up. That's a good idea. About a year later, they announced they were closing down the entire military training area for the same reason. Oh, there's my map. Okay. Well, we knew that was a fabrication for the following reason. The men I worked with, many of us were at an age where we would be having children, and we didn't want children with flippers, we wanted children with arms and legs. So we, without telling the Army, without the Army's knowledge or consent, we took our own radiation detection equipment into the training area, and we always did that. We never found anything above normal background radiation, ever. So we knew that when they announced they were shutting down that training area because of nuclear waste, we knew that was a cover story, we knew that was a fabrication. That's when I began my own investigation. Taking photographs on the ground, taking photographs from the air, doing Freedom of Information Act requests, which is a formal process to request documents from the government about government activities. And last but not least, debriefing men and women who actually work there, both as outside vendors and employees on the premises. That's where the real information came from. Here's how the government, or one of the ways, I should say, the government keeps secrets. It's by compartmentalization. Now, many of you have heard about the Manhattan Project. That was a project during World War II where the United States was building the first 2 atomic weapons. My father and my grandfather both worked on the Manhattan Project. They were plumbers. There was about 250,000 American men and women who worked on the Manhattan Project. There may have been 100, maybe 200 of those men and women who actually knew what they were doing. The rest of them, like my father, the plumber, my grandfather, the plumber, they didn't have a clue what they were doing because it was all compartmentalized. That's how they keep secrets. I became friends with a woman who was an employee. She was an environmental engineer at the Weldon Springs Remedial Action Project. And she wore a ID badge that had a certain color code on it, which allowed her to go in certain areas of the administration building and prohibited her from going into other areas of the administration building. Now, why would you prohibit your own employees from going into certain areas of your own administration building? Why would you do that? Well, there's only one reason: you're trying to keep a secret. There is no other reason. What they did at Weldon Springs was build an underground command and control center. There was a water tank that could take care of a city of 2,000 people probably. Massive electric power coming into it. And once again, they moved a lot of dirt and rock. Another friend of mine, in fact, I served with him in Special Forces. He was a surveyor. That was his day job. Green Beret on weekends, surveyor during the week. He said, John, they've had every survey company in Metro St. Louis out here incrementally doing a bit here and a bit there. No survey company knows the entire thing, only bits and pieces. Once again, compartmentalization. We debriefed a ready-mix, a concrete ready-mix driver. They deliver the big trucks with the concrete. He said, John, I've been doing this for 30 years. I've never had an order to place titanium flakes in the concrete before. Why would you do that? Well, to block radio frequency engineering. It wouldn't stop radiation, but it would block radio frequency engineering. Let's look at this map a little bit since it's here. It's pretty much as I describe. Now, my starting point when I did this, I had to have a beginning point. I used Gordon Michael Scallion's map. He's a fairly well-known psychic. He did his map, probably in the early to mid-1980s. What we discovered with Scallion's map was from the Mississippi River east, it was fairly accurate except for Wisconsin. Without exception, every Navy veteran said Wisconsin's going to be completely underwater. From the Mississippi River west, Scallion's map's not even close. Scallion's map shows the Pacific Ocean going all the way into Nevada and even parts of Utah. This is the real Navy map. Now, I'm going to say about 7 or 8 years ago, somebody published on the internet something called the Navy map. It's not the Navy map. It's basically a version of Scallion's map. And it's been published and published over and over. And anybody who's looked into what Google does and how they do it, they know that Google will obfuscate. A good example of what Google does in obfuscation has to do with something called the Black Knight satellite. Pepsi-Cola in January of 2016, I believe it was, they did this very slick production. Anybody see it about the Black Knight satellite, Pepsi-Cola? Anybody? Nobody? Okay. It's there. You can see it on YouTube. Up until then, almost nobody had even heard of the Black Knight satellite. It was a big splash in the media. I don't know how many $1 million that Pepsi-Cola spent on this thing, but it had to be expensive. Once again, we get into ancient archaeology, forbidden archaeology, when it comes to the Black Knight satellite and our ancestors. One of the jobs, or I should say, back up a bit, archaeology has 2 jobs. One is to recover ancient technology. The other is to keep us from finding out about it. That's it. When the U.S. Army went into Baghdad, where did they go first? The Army headquarters, the government headquarters? They went to the Baghdad Museum. That's where they went first. That's what they wanted, in the basement of the Baghdad Museum. Ancient technology, ancient documents. And they got it, and they brought it all back. It's probably in the basement of the Smithsonian as we speak, being reviewed. The Black Knight satellite. There's an author, he lives in New Zealand, archaeologist, Jonathan Gray. He wrote a book titled Dead Men's Secrets. Dead Men's Secrets. Jonathan Gray. The first page of the first chapter, he talks about the Black Knight satellite. I hadn't heard about this before. Fascinated me. The scientists believe it's about 12,000 years old. It's in orbit, on a polar orbit, just below the Van Allen radiation belt, about 22,000 miles up. It took me several years to find the third dimension of the Black Knight satellite. I knew it was 40 by 70 feet. I didn't know the third dimension, which is 20 feet, until about 2 or 3 years ago. 40 feet by 70 feet by 20 feet. It has another nickname you don't hear very much publicly. The other nickname is the chirogenic box. Chirogenics, of course, is the study and use of absolute zero. Everything changes at absolute zero, which brings up another whole set of questions about the Black Knight satellite. It was during the Eisenhower administration, the late 1950s. Just to go back a little bit, the first American satellite went up about the size of a big grapefruit. The first, unless I got this backwards, the first Sputnik, I think, was about the size of a basketball. I remember as a little boy walking out into my yard and I could see this thing going over on an equatorial orbit, by the way. As I sometimes say, if you're a 35-year-old Air Force captain on night watch at the White House, waking up your five-star general president at 2 o'clock in the morning without a really good reason would not be career enhancing, but that's what they did. They woke up the president. Can you come to the Situation Room, Mr. President? We found something. They found the Black Knight satellite. Now, before those two, the Sputnik and our first satellite went up, there was no radar or optical tracking stations for things in space. They had no reason for them before the Sputnik and our satellite went up. So they had optical and satellite tracking, radar tracking stations set up, and they found the Black Knight satellite on a polar orbit. Now, we couldn't do polar orbits until about 20 years later. We could only do equatorial orbits. They immediately knew that they found something very special. They immediately knew that the technology on there is something they really, really wanted to get their hands on. Oh, that's interesting. It became a matter of highest national security and highest national priority to gain access to what's in that box. Now, I've got as far as a United States senator from one of our southern states who knows the Black Knight satellite exists but doesn't know if we've gained access to it or not. My belief, and I have no evidence to back this up, my belief is the Apollo space missions was a pretext to get their hands on the money and develop the lift capability to get 22,000 miles up to gain access to what's inside the Black Knight satellite. As I know, the Apollo space mission didn't put any Americans on the moon. I know that for a fact. Anybody who believes that needs to do their homework. Have they gained access to the Black Knight satellite? Quite frankly, I don't know. I do know that technology since the mid-1950s has gone forward so incredibly fast. I know there's 3 engineers given credit for developing the first transistor. I have people telling me that it's actually reverse engineered alien technology. I don't know, but it certainly could be. When you start looking at Nibiru, one of the first things people want to find out if their aunt's home near the ocean is going to be underwater, if their home near the ocean is going to be underwater. That's an understandable thing. It's a very human thing. You want to know if people you care about are going to be safe. There's a lot more to it than that, however. A lot more. A lot of people, Americans, I do private consultations, and I'm certainly willing to do private consultations here in Europe. They look at these maps, at this map, the map that was up there a moment ago, and they say, oh, there's a safe place. The Appalachian Mountains, good high elevation, plenty of rainfall, mild winters, and I agree with them. Great altitude, plenty of water, mild winters. Appalachian Mountains are, well, how can I describe this? You got Tennessee and North Carolina, South Carolina, right down where those states meet. Here's the problem with the Appalachian Mountains. What is this there? Oh, a pointer. Oh, how neat. They're going to make me high-tech anyway. The Appalachian Mountains are right here. And the Blue Ridge Parkway is right where the water stops. Pretty nifty, huh? Totally lost my place there. Here's the problem. You've got 75, 80 million people along in here. Basically, here's Washington, D.C. is about here. Boston's about here. It's one continuous city between Boston and Washington, D.C. is basically one city of maybe 50 million people. And then between here and here, you've got maybe 75 million people, many millions of which will figure out what's happening in time to get in their cars and take off to wherever they think might be safe, which is probably going to be the Appalachian Mountains. That's the problem with the Appalachian Mountains. In Europe, you've got similar situations. Most of France will be underwater, parts of Germany, and so forth. Millions of people, they'll figure out this water's coming, and they want to go someplace safe. Well, the Swiss Alps, Bavaria, so forth. If they have time, they're going to go there. You can count on it. One of the things I write about in my paper, No Need for Panic, there we go, is the government's plural, not just the American government, but all these governments. As we get close to the event, there's going to be something happen. Maybe Ebola, maybe terrorist attacks, maybe a combination economic collapse. Whatever the event or events are, it will be so severe that when the government tells people to stay at home to be safe, almost all of them will stay at home to be safe, because that will appear to be the right thing to do, the proper thing to do, to be safe, to stay home, as opposed to going to Bavaria or the Swiss Alps or any high point. By the time they do figure out that they need to go to those places, it'll be too late. The government's job, in their opinion, is to protect themselves, with the exceptions, of course, of what the Chinese are doing for their chosen people, what Russians are doing with their chosen people. And once again, that's kept from the public. Most people in China don't know about these brand new cities. If they do, they don't think anything about it. Most people in Russia don't know about the underground cities in the Ural Mountains. When the time comes, the designated people will be moved to the new cities in China, to the underground cities in the Ural Mountains. What will England do? Well, they got some, I don't know if I'd call them mountains, they got them hills, and they're already moving critical infrastructure, critical government offices to the Highlands of Scotland. That's already happening. The royal family will probably take off for the Rocky Mountains in Canada, I imagine, someplace they think is safe. All these things are happening behind the scenes, without public knowledge, without public discourse, and we'll continue to do that. Our outreach here, with video on YouTube, it's going to save a lot of lives. A lot of people watch this and say, that's a bunch of silliness. Let's go watch a football game. Others will watch it and they will move forward and do their own homework and do their own research and come to their own independent conclusions, separate and apart from what John Moore says. Don't take my word for it. Do your own homework. Come to your own conclusions. Read, read, read. In the States, and I know Europe doesn't have the same problem we do, most adults under age 50 in the United States, for them, reading is not fun. Reading is not pleasurable. If they do it at all, it's because they have no choice. That's most adults in the United States under age 50. And it's a consequence of public education and what they've done to us. By design, by the way. By design. But for those who can read and will read, there's a lot to know. The bibliography at the end of my DVD, you're going to read 20,000 pages or more. If you really want to comprehend this, if you really want to understand it, what's happening, how it's going to happen, why it's going to happen, you need to read a lot. If you just watch my 4-hour DVD, you'll learn enough to get you started, hopefully. I've had entire families sit down and watch these 4 hours without saying a word. I get emails and phone calls all the time from people who began this quest, began by watching my DVD and going on to do the research, come to their conclusions, and then make their decision. Don't get caught up in a timetable. There's people who've given out timetables. I'm not going to mention any names here. But during most of the calendar year 2012, we had several people, very prominent people in the alternative media, talking about the 21st day of December 2012 being the day. Myself and my friend Professor McCanny spent much of that year telling people that December 21st was only the day before December 22nd and nothing else. Nothing else. We had people advising Americans by the thousands to go to a state park in Missouri where there were 3 primitive campgrounds. Now, primitive campground means no running water, no electricity, no toilet. Thousands of people were being told to go to this campground in a Missouri State Park. How crazy is that? By the 3rd day, that would have been a stinking, unhealthy mess if they had done it. Thank goodness they didn't. This afternoon, I'll be talking about preparedness. And where are we at on time? We got about 10 minutes. The breakdown of how people look at it between men and women is something I've been observing for a number of years. I did my first paid consultation in the summer of 1977, 40 years ago this month. And it's very predictable the way most women look at preparedness most of the time and the way most men look at preparedness most of the time. And the two really do complement each other. They really do. Frequently, I'll have a married couple where either the man or the woman believe that getting ready for Nibiru is real and needs to happen, and the spouse thinks it's a waste of time and money. That happens a lot, and it's difficult to work with. I found out many years ago that the spouse who doesn't want to hear about it may become more agreeable if it's put into the terms of insurance. Now, in Western society, we have health insurance, automobile insurance, home insurance, life insurance, and others, all of which you may write a check every month, and at the end of the year, you got a stack of canceled checks to show for your efforts. When it comes to preparedness, you don't have a stack of canceled checks. You got 3-dimensional objects. You've got tools. You've got food. You've got training. They can't take your training away from you. All of which might be quite useful in the future. Food you can always eat. Training, you may need that. Tools, you could use the tools. If nothing else, you can always sell them in the future. Try selling your canceled checks from your car insurance. See how far that goes. So that helps with some of these couples that are having this discourse and this disagreement between the husband and wife. It sometimes helps, it doesn't always. When you've been doing this as long as I have, there's not much new that comes at me. Occasionally it does, but not frequently. I was working with a gentleman about a month ago. All this information he just found out about 5 or 6 months ago. And he just feels absolutely overwhelmed. He says, John, it's just too much. I don't have time. I can't do everything that can be done. I said, that's okay. You do what you can do. Don't worry about what you can't do. You take joy in what you can do. We all have limitations. A 20-year-old soldier has physical limitations. An 80-year-old grandmother has physical limitations. They're different. A 20-year-old soldier can carry a 100-pound backpack all day long. The 80-year-old grandmother may carry 2 liters of water all day long. They both got limitations. Everybody's got financial limitations, some greater than others. We'll talk about this more a little bit later. And the most important thing about preparedness, which is your spiritual preparedness. One of my consultation clients, he owns a business he inherited from his father with 100 employees. That's quite a payroll to meet every week, which he does. He has the financial ability to buy semi-tractor trailer loads of food and supplies and tools, pretty much anything he wants, which he has done. But it's never enough because his spiritual house is not in order. It will never be enough. No matter what he gets, it will never be enough because the spiritual house is not in order. Most important thing you can do for yourself, quite frankly. And move on from there. One of the things I'll be talking about this afternoon is skills. I'll give you a little bit of a teaser here. Whether you have a group of 6 people or 600, there's 2 skills that will be in the biggest demand and the shortest supply. The first is ham radio skills. Now, I was laying on my belly during the Tet Offensive in Vietnam in 1968. We would do anything to get our hands on good, current, reliable information, which was in very short supply. If you're in a crisis and you don't know what's going on, most people, most of the time, their brain will go to the worst possible scenario immediately. Ham radio skills and the equipment that go with it will let you communicate with the world, let you know what's going on. The other skill is emergency first aid, emergency medical skills. Once again, in the biggest demand and shortest supply, whether you've got 6 people or 600. You need the training, you need the equipment and supplies to go with it. If you got the training and don't have the equipment and supplies, what's the point? You're going to be very limited. One of the things we'll be doing this afternoon is questions and answers. I'm a radio talk show host. I love when people call in because they'll bring up things that if they didn't, I wouldn't think about them. So when you come back this afternoon, I want you to bring your questions with you. And you doubting Thomases, I want to hear them. If you've ever been to political events where there's an elected official speaking and they're taking questions, these days, the questions have to be written and handed in. These politicians do not want spontaneous questions from the audience. They're scared to death of that. I'm not. Bring it on. I want these spontaneous, unrehearsed questions. I really look forward to them. Once you've looked at Nibiru, Planet X, Wormwood, once you come and understand it, you can get carried away with the overwhelming knowledge that you've acquired, with the knowledge that the world that you know will cease to exist. As one man said, federal government employee, he says, "John, I'm too old to learn how to live all over again." But that's where we're going to be. We'll be living the lifestyle of our grandparents, our great-grandparents, an agrarian lifestyle, growing our own food, not going any farther than we can walk in half a day because you want to get back at the end of the day. I know in the States, when they were setting up our states and counties, they set up enough counties that the county seat would be half-a-day horse ride from the farthest location in the county. So a man could ride his horse to the county seat, conduct business, and get back before dark. Before the 1930s in the States, government was at the county level. Very little involvement with the state government, almost no involvement at all with the federal government before the Great Depression in the 1930s. We're going to go back to that in the States, in Europe, in Asia. Government will be, if it exists at all, government will be at the local level. Now, there'll be a federal government that thinks they're in charge, but they won't be. They won't have the communications. They won't have the ability to go out and do much at all. There's other possibilities involving geopolitics, what the Russians may want to do and what the Chinese may want to do. That's another whole area that could be another whole lecture, which I'm qualified to talk about, but we're not here to talk about that. Now, your emphasis has to be on your family, on your community. One of the things I warn people about is what I call the island concept of preparedness. My family and I, we're going to get our 40 acres, 80 acres, put a fence around it, and it's us against the world. That's a disaster waiting to happen, is all that is. That's all that is. You need to be part of a community of like-minded people, as we say. And after the event, there's going to be a lot of like-minded people. They will figure out real quick that they need to come together as a community. The community I live in, Crawford County, Missouri, we have a local preparedness group. We have monthly training, things like first aid, communications, map and compass reading, CPR. We have a movie every Friday night, which is a social event. Get together and get to know each other. Have fun. Have some hot popcorn. It's all part of building a community. Do not think that you and your family can hold off the world. That's a disaster waiting to happen. If you think you can do that, you're wrong. You're absolutely wrong. You need to be part of a community that will come together as a community to survive together.